What do artificial intelligence and spirituality have to do with each other? I have raised this issue with many gurus, many spiritual people from various traditions, but there's one person, Swami Sarvapriyananda of Ramakrishna Mission in New York, who gets it. He asked me to explain AI to him and what the significance is. He caught on very quickly. So here he goes to a major conference sponsored by the United Nations on technology and spirituality with various faith leaders, and he in fact explains this answer from my book in a way that is absolutely amazing. So I invite you to listen to this, and I thank Swamiji. Here we go.
I was not um, I was not aware of the possible effects of AI on the domain of spirituality and philosophy. I must thank Rajiv Malhotra's book. This brought the whole issue to my attention: Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Power. It's published by Rupa Publications. So, based upon some of the concerns that Rajiv Malhotra has raised here, I'm going to talk for the next 10 minutes or so, 10, 12 minutes, and raise four specific areas of concern. Before I go into that, I'm not complaining about AI here. It's not a negative talk. It's the power and promise of AI is acknowledged, and it is in fact even welcome. It's just that because the subject is ethics and AI, what are the areas in which we need to be watchful, concerned, and prepare ourselves? So I'm speaking only from my perspective, from perspective of spirituality, Indian philosophy, if you will, from that perspective. Four areas of concern. The first area is attention. Several months ago, in fact, last year, we organized a retreat here in Garrison, New York, on meditation. And we had sessions on different approaches to meditation: Buddhist mindfulness meditation, meditation in Kashmir Shaivism, meditation in the Bhakti traditions, meditation in Vedanta, and so on. And a professor of philosophy, Professor Arindam Chakravarti, when I had told him about the scheme of this retreat, he said, that's very interesting. At the end of it, what you should do is take a look at what is common to all these traditions. So that would be interesting. And we found in all these diverse traditions, Buddhist meditation, that's a perspective which does not accept the existence of God, compared to the Bhakti traditions in Hinduism, which are all about God. What could be common to these approaches? The upshot was we discovered what is underlying all meditation techniques, all meditation traditions, is training of attention. So that's the common thing. And that is an area of concern already with our existing internet and social media technologies. There was this documentary film which made some waves here last year, The Social Dilemma, which talked about how social media is impacting two areas. One is attention, and the other one is privacy. So, all these Facebook and Twitter and all these social media platforms, where the first thing we notice is that an enormous amount of services are provided to us, and there is a saying, and it seems to be provided to us free. And there is a saying that if something is being provided free to you, then you are the product which is being sold. And that is true. These modern social media platforms, they provide an enormous amount of free service to us, but what is being sold there is us, more specifically, our attention. So they talk about an attention economy. See, what propels these technologies? What fuels these technologies? It is nothing more than money, of course. It's profit driven. And so what they discovered was it is not enough to provide interesting content online anymore. One must in fact specifically try to grab the attention of the person. The whole idea is that these platforms make money from advertisement, and so that demands our attention. What they have been doing in Silicon Valley is designing and fine-tuning these platforms so that they kind of train us into distraction. Instead of concentrated and focused attention, we are being trained into distraction. Let me give a practical example of what is meant by this. Our phones, I also have one of those, these smartphones. Have you noticed how once in a while they buzz or beep or there's a ting sound and something has come, maybe a notification, maybe a little message or a text or something? It seems innocuous, but there is something insidious there. The idea there is that it functions on the same psychology as the slot machines and gambling machines in Las Vegas, for example. They provide us with some incentive to keep looking, to keep trying, and it seems it trains our neuropsychology to keep giving us bursts of dopamine once in a while, so that we get sort of addicted to keep looking at the device, at the smartphone or whatever. The more we look at it once in a while, we get a little bit of pleasure. This is the psychology of addiction. What is the advantage to these platforms? We are looking at them more and more, and of course that leads to more advertisement revenue for them. As far as I understand, this is the point of these, these constant notifications. One point here is that this means these technologies are not neutral. We always have this cliched idea that after all it is a technology, and we've been hearing this also, that it is a technology. It can have good uses and bad uses. It's a tired old cliche. Some technologies are not neutral. Somebody explained it very well. In this country, people have guns. They keep a lot of guns, unfortunately, at home. So the practice is to keep the gun cabinet, liquor cabinet and gun cabinet under lock and key so that children cannot touch them. Now, if the technology were neutral, it can be used for good or bad. Why would you keep it under lock and key? Because everybody knows that there are some technologies which are more prone to accidents, to causing damage. The way our internet technologies are going, the way artificial is coming, is a kind of technology like that, which is not neutral. It can actually, and it is already causing some kind of damage. Teachers and students are already talking about a phenomenon they call continuous partial attention. Continuous partial attention. It's something that we are all aware of. In fact, in meetings, in classrooms these days, you will notice it's not that people are not paying attention. People are paying attention, but only intermittently. Sometimes they're looking at their phone, sometimes at their laptop, and then again listening to you. It's something that people who are listening here on this platform may also be experiencing right now. Now, what is the problem here? One big problem is in spirituality. As I said, all meditation techniques depend upon attention, upon the training of attention, on the ability to focus and hold focus for long periods of time, whether it is following the breath in mindfulness meditation or concentrating on the deity or holding a visualization, in whichever way, or self-inquiry in Vedanta, whichever way, the fuel, the fuel behind these practices is attention. Now, the more we become distracted, the more difficult it is to pay attention, to continuously hold attention. It is having severe effects in education, in corporate life, in every sphere of human interaction, where people are always a little bit distracted. But the most severe impact will be on people who try to meditate, for example. It will become almost impossible. So this is one area of concern. The spirituality depends on attention and the training of attention. What these technologies are doing, and will probably do in an exponential fashion in the near future, is train us in the opposite direction, surreptitiously, without our knowledge. From a very young age, children will be trained to distraction and restlessness. So this is one point. The second point is community, selflessness, altruistic action, what one might call the term karma yoga, which basically means that our instinctive the instinctive the urge is to act for ourselves selfishly. And if one wants to be spiritual, one must extend the boundaries of the self, include others. So engage in selfless action, in altruistic action, in service activities, for example. Now, what is the connection to AI? One problem could be, and is already is that these technologies tend to cut us away from our fellow human beings. It's a common sight everywhere. If you go to an airport, not in these pandemic days maybe, but usually at an airport or a railway station, you will see hundreds of people, thousands of people, all sitting close together, but not interacting with each other. They are all looking at their screens and they're absorbed in their screens. I go for walks in Central Park here, a beautiful place, but half the time people are on their screens. They're not looking around. In one of the Upanishads, I think the Katha Upanishad, it is said, why is it that it's so difficult to realize the truth about ourselves? The problem is that we are continuously externalized. Our senses flow outwards. So that is the problem. We are always looking at the world outside and not inside, and therefore it's difficult to realize the truth about ourselves. So in the Upanishad, it says this. I remember many years ago, I chanted that particular verse in a talk, in a conference. And the moderator, who was a retired IFS officer and a very erudite lady, she stood up and said, Swamiji has said that we are too much engaged in looking at the world outside, we should look within. And I'm saying that it would be good if we were engaged in looking at the world outside. We are not even looking at the world outside, we are looking at our screens. And that's now. Imagine when AI comes in, how much more immersive that experience will be. The problem is that we might be so immersed in our virtual worlds that we forget to interact with our fellow beings. We lose the sense of community, and that makes compassion more difficult. There have been studies which have shown that compassion, first of all, requires attention. Again, we are back to the question of attention. We must first be aware of our fellow human being and the suffering of that human being, and then only compassion is evoked. If we do not at all pay attention to the person next to me on the subway or in the park, how are we going to be aware of the suffering of the others? And where will be the motivation then be for for compassion and for altruistic action? So that's a second problem area, that how can there be motivation for altruistic action, for compassion, when we are not aware of our community of fellow human beings? The third area of concern would be what might be generally called bhakti. All religions, theistic religions, it's about God, but even the non-theistic religions like Buddhism and Jainism, the feeling of love and compassion and devotion is to be cultivated. So what is the underlying philosophy is that our desires continuously flow out in 100 different channels through to the world, and ultimately these are not satisfying. If you really want satisfaction and peace of mind, you have to collect all these desires and sublimate them and focus them either towards God or a transcendent being, enlightened being like the Buddha or the Jina or whatever it is, and focus it in the love of all beings. Now, if AI, and it's almost certain that AI is going to be driven by the profit motive, it will even more insidiously, more effectively seek to fulfill every little desire and maximize our outward urges, our desires for 100 different things in the world. Because it's going to be market-driven, profit-driven anyway. So that's another area of concern, that our bhakti traditions might be impacted. And finally, from the perspective of Vedanta, the path of knowledge, there is a curious similarity with the way AI functions and how Vedanta functions also, but ultimately they are very dissimilar. What is the similarity? Both of them, they inquire into our sense of self, and then analyze it. Vedanta says that your apparent sense of self, that I'm this limited body and mind, this is not true, this is a false self. And we are shown by arguments and insights how we cannot be the body, how we are not the mind, that we are the spirit of the Atman, the witness consciousness beyond body and mind. What AI does also is it analyzes our thought patterns, speech patterns, and behavior patterns, building up enormous databases, and then analyzes it using algorithms. So the ideas of an algorithmic self, so that it can be analyzed and divided and then focused upon and then micromanaged sort of. But the problem with AI is that ultimately it does not find anything higher or transcendent beyond this. So there is a huge philosophical difference. The basis, the materialistic basis of AI and the spiritual basis of all our religious and spiritual traditions. If I were to put it in one sentence, it would be the basis of AI is that consciousness is ultimately material and can be infinitely subdivided and analyzed and controlled and manipulated. The spiritual approach is consciousness is not material, it is transcendent and it is indivisible, and that is where we must ultimately seek to find meaning and peace and transcendence. So these four areas of concern which we need to look out for and manage in the years ahead: the area of attention, the importance of focus versus distraction, the area of altruistic action. Unless we are connected with our fellow beings, I'm afraid unselfishness, altruism might disappear altogether. And the area of devotion into some higher power, that is one area that might be impacted. And finally, the very philosophical idea of what is a human being, what is our ground reality, fundamental reality. There seems to be a conflict between the AI version of a human being and the spiritual version of what a human being, of what we truly are.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.